Okay, I call that time. So let's make a start. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Increasing International CPG Market Share with Location Intelligence. We're really excited that you could join us here today. A couple of bits of housekeeping before we kick off. So we've got a chat, we've got a Q&A. So if you have any questions as this comes up, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will address them at the end. Similarly, if you have any problems, if you can't see anything, if you can't hear anything, drop that in the chat as well and our moderator will help you. And so without further ado, let's get going. So welcome to our webinar. Let's kick off with some introductions. So my name is Helen McKenzie. If you've been to any Carto webinars before, you're probably sick and tired of hearing my voice now because I do a bunch of these. My job title is Geospatial Advocate, which means I am basically a geospatial hype person. My job is to get people really excited about geospatial data and analysis. And I'm really excited to be here talking to you about CPG today. Dylan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for that, Helen. Pleasure to be here. Really excited to support Carto. We've been longtime partners, and as a note, we'll be at both your spatial data conferences in London and New York, and really excited to talk through how we can support CPGs globally.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Dylan. Okay, so this seminar is going to be about 45 minutes long. In that time, I hope you will be able to take away 3 things. First of all, I hope you'll learn about the challenges that are facing international growth for CPG brands and how you can address that. Hear about 3 use cases for point of interest data for CPG brands, and then finally see these in action and see some real use cases and analysis that can help you out. So let me hand over to Dylan to talk us through challenges to global growth for CPG companies.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we work with a lot of consumer brands that are facing a big challenge when it comes to global growth. And what it comes down to is there are different recipes for how you tackle markets outside of the typical Western domestic markets, right? So the opportunity is there. More than half of global spending on consumer goods happens in these markets. It's about a $6 trillion market opportunity. And the kind of short and long of it is that the growth is only about 2x year over year, which is really, really low from a consumer brand's perspective. And we want to talk about why that is. So first, we are dealing with a much more informal market or economy. So instead of having a few hundred large brick and mortar retailers that sell consumer products, we're dealing with millions of independent channels. And within those independent channels, they have very limited shelf space. Think 2 shelves to put your products on instead of 40 or 50 at a larger brick and mortar in Western markets. And when you have that limited shelf space, you deal with a lot of heavy competition, not just from other multinational consumer brands, but you're also dealing with competition from local or regional consumer brands. And you're dealing with competition from your own internal product portfolio. So you're figuring out between these thousands of products, where are we going to place things that are going to sell? On top of that, especially the last few years, we've had high business turnover. So places close, they turn over. And from a data perspective, that becomes a huge, huge challenge. And then on top of that, we have so many different local preferences with our consumers. How do we make sure we align those products with places that they will sell in, and factoring in not just value and price, but things like environmental performance or other preferences that are local to that international market. If you go to the next slide, we'll talk what the opportunities are for these CPGs through better data. So, obviously understanding from where we are right now in New York City, what's happening in Brazil, Japan, larger regions is really difficult without local data. And so if you have a really good foundation for this, you can very quickly analyze your global market coverage. You can locate new channels to sell your products, help your salespeople prioritize on stores that are more likely to convert. And ultimately what it comes down to is making more money. So increasing your revenue in these markets. And then as we talked about before, how do we get into new customer segments we haven't broken into yet, and aligning the products with those local preferences in an area. If you go to the next slide, we'll kind of talk through what the foundational data is for this, which is global merchant data, or what we focus on specifically as point of interest or places data. Now, the challenge with this information is that it is highly, highly inaccurate. So we collect about 10 billion data points and distill that down to 175 million places globally across 200 countries and territories. And when you look at all the data out there, a lot of it is missing some sort of core attribute. Some of it could have incorrect location information, bad addresses, bad geocodes. And a lot of those places have closed. In our US data set alone, we saw about 2 million places turnover out of 19 million in an 18-month span. So you can imagine from the data perspective how challenging it is to leverage globally scaled data. And at the end of the day, you don't want your technical folks dealing with this data internally. You're wasting a lot of good efficiency on that. And if you have poor data, if you have misleading information, you're not going to focus on the right strategies, the right areas, and ultimately you're not going to make money. You're going to lose out on revenue and growth. So very messy, as our CTO calls it, global merchant data or POI data is the sewage of the internet, and making sure that you have the best information possible is critical. On the next slide, we'll go through a couple of use cases here to start with. And I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that there are multiple approaches to this. So we're going to start with foundational POI data use cases or merchant data use cases, but you can grow that into a more detailed analysis by working with partners like Carto. And that's what we want to emphasize. There's multiple ways to approach this. There's ways to start small. You can start big. And again, a really critical aspect is working with a very capable firm like Carto. Next slide. So we'll talk about the first use case here, which is pretty simple. It's prioritizing on the right places. So if you're looking into a specific area, first you want to be able to inventory all of your existing sales channels. Now, seems simple, but a lot of consumer goods companies that we work with are just starting to go on that journey. It's a great first step. But what they'll find is that a lot of gaps in that data exist, especially internationally. And if we have our first party data, at least in a place where we've digitized it, we've inventoried it as best we can then go enhance that data with third party vendors. And so we'll fill things like the geocode, the address, we'll figure out if these places are still open or not, and really enhance the existing information that we have. We also want to then identify what are the best types of merchants that we can sell to, or we can have sell our products, right? So where are there opportunities, where have we not seen success, where there are new types of stores emerging in an area that we want to take advantage of. And really what it comes down to is just making sure that we know what that ideal merchant profile is. And that starts with inventorying our existing data. Once we've done a little bit of groundwork to put that information together, very simply, we want to figure out where are all the new channels that we are not selling our product in, right? So where's our products now and where could they be? What you'll find though, is you don't have the ability, especially in our labor constrained post-COVID world, you're not going to have the ability to necessarily tackle every single store for conversion. So you want to be able to prioritize. And the great thing about merchant data or POI data is you can leverage this information to do that without additional data sets. You can look at things like popularity indices. You can look at dwell times. You can add indicators like custom confidence scores to really drive prioritization and make sure that your team is focused on the right things. So a lot of ways for us to make sure that we are tackling the most high likelihood of converting stores in an area. If you go to the next slide, we can look at kind of a broader analysis. And this is where Helen will graduate this kind of analysis into more detail with additional data sets. But if we think about starting points for this, it's same thing we did on the last slide, which is inventorying our data, enhancing it, defining what merchants exist. But when we take a much broader view or a higher level view, not looking at a specific neighborhood or a city to go convert individual channels in, this is the power of global POI data, is you can look at a city, region, country, or even continent to figure out where are the gaps in our trade areas, right? So where are we missing out on a lot of opportunities geographically to drive more sales and to increase the sales of our consumer goods? Once we've created those trade areas or identified where those trade areas are, maybe a specific part of Monterrey, Mexico, we can then enrich those trade areas with more in-depth data, which you'll still have some challenges with because internationally the data is very different and sparse. Really nice thing about global POI data, it is very consistent in what you have and you can scale that globally. So a couple ways to tackle this with a foundational data set like POI data. Helen, do you want to take over for the next few slides?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Dylan. So the final use case that we're going to be talking about is territory expansion. And just to build on what Dylan was just talking about, there are so many different ways you can tackle these types of problems, so many different varying levels of complexity and sophistication. What I'm going to be showing you here is quite a sort of data science end of this type of analysis. So there's some really sophisticated techniques in here, but I don't want that to put you off because, like we said, there are so many different ways of tackling these problems. So if you aren't already a Carto user, I can't stress enough, please do head over to our website, carto.com, and grab yourself a free 2-week trial. We'll be sharing this recording and also sharing the slides afterwards, so you can go back and create all of these maps and do all of this analysis and have a go at this yourself. So let's check this out in action and tackle a really typical use case. So let's assume that you and I, are analysts at a fizzy drinks company, and we have 2 main product ranges. We have our economy range, which is low cost and has a really sort of broad cross-consumer appeal. And then we have our luxury range, which is a higher cost, and it's really targeted towards young adults, young professionals, students, that sort of demographic. We want to expand our company to Mexico City, and we want to know which are the best merchants in Mexico City for each of these product types. So let's take a look at how we might want to approach that. So first of all, we want to define who are the possible merchants in Mexico City, and this is really similar to what Dylan was talking about in his first use case. Then we want to conduct trade area analysis, so look at where are the areas around those merchants where people are really likely to be using those merchants. And again, this is just like what Dylan was talking about before. But then we want to build on that. So we'll look at those trade areas, the catchments for each merchant, and try and understand the demographic and economic characteristics of each catchment to work out not just where the store serves, but who are the types of people those stores are serving. And then we're going to use some data science clustering techniques to group the stores into clusters. So we can say this type of cluster would be really suitable for this product, this cluster, this product, this cluster actually doesn't suit any of our products at all. And then the final sort of output of all of this is going to help us decide where we want to stock our different product types. So these tools that I'm going to be showing you in a second all stem from Carto's analytics toolbox, which is a range of loads of different types of SQL-based analytics functions to help you with your location intelligence. We know that location is super important for the CPG industry, more so than a lot of industries. So we've actually created a whole toolbox specifically for you guys. The tools that I'm going to be showcasing today are generating trade areas, aggregating customer segmentation data to those trade areas, and then running customer segmentation. But there's a bunch of other tools in there, so definitely head over to our site and check them out. And I just wanted to really quickly mention that I mentioned that these tools are SQL based, but then not all of them are. So I think my glamorous moderator should have a poll that they can share. Although I can't see, so I'm just going to quickly stop sharing my screen.
It's up there. I can see it.
It's up there. Brilliant. Let me come back to Zoom. Brilliant. Thank you. Yes. So we're running a really quick poll. Sorry if you're seeing 2 of my face right now while I'm sharing my screen. Just to really quickly ask, get a feel for in the audience, how are your SQL skills? Would you say you're 10 out of 10 expert, Would you say you're more of an intermediate, beginner, or you're just totally allergic to SQL? How would you sort of rate yourself?
Me personally, I'm somewhat allergic, but
Somewhat allergic. Why?
on this, I assume there's some smarter people on this call than me. So.
Well, I would definitely define myself as generally quite coding allergic, but actually, so I joined Carto about 1.5 years ago and got thrown really into the deep end with SQL, and now I like cannot live without it. I just find it's so useful, and it's actually really easy to learn, even for people like me. So let's see what we have had in the audience. So 11% say they're a 10 out of 10 expert. Love your confidence, love that. I wish I could have some of that. 47% say they are intermediate, 21% beginner, and 21%, Dylan included, say they are allergic to SQL. So that's really helpful and really good to know the sort of broad range that we've got in there. It's sort of covered all bases. Let me just return to my presentation. I believe I'm still sharing my screen. Dylan, scream if you can't see my presentation.
We're good.
Can't hear a scream. Fantastic. So the tools that I'm going to be showing you in a second are based in SQL, but Carto actually has a tool called Workflows, which is, as you can see on the left, it's kind of a flowchart style analytical tool. So if you're not comfortable using SQL, don't worry, we do have these tools available to help you. So let's take a look at how this would work. So our first step in this analysis is to select our merchants. Just for sort of speed, and because this is a very illustrative process, I've just selected 500 stores across Mexico City. I've actually selected them randomly, but you or us as fizzy drinks analysts would actually undertake this exercise Dylan's talked about, which is working out which are your most high priority store. So I'm actually quickly gonna pop out of this and show you how you can access this data with Carto. So if you are not familiar with Carto, this is what Carto is. This is what it looks like. When you are a Carto user, when you sign up for that free trial that I know you're all going to do, you will have access to this. And one of the really exciting parts about Carto is our data observatory. So this is a data catalog of around, I think, 13,000 12,000, I was over-egging it, data sets, some of which are open data sets, like things like the census or Natural Earth or OpenStreetMap, sort of your day-to-day geospatial data sets that you use in your analysis. But then we also partner with fantastic partners like Dataplor, and we share their data in this way as well. So let's just take a look some of those data sets. I'm currently in a WeWork where there's a big event going on downstairs, and I was saying that to preempt the Wi-Fi not working, but it's looking great. So you can see we've got these brilliant places data sets from Dataplor from all of these different countries. Let's just take a look at Argentina and see what that looks like. So you can see we've got all, this is a really small sample of the points of interest data sets. You can see them here on a map. And then we can also see what we've got behind those. So we've got all these different really useful variables to help you with your analysis, like different categories, names, contact details. It's all in there. You can also see, if you're not a Carto user, a public-facing version of this catalog. So feel free to jump on there and take a look. Now back to my slide. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dylan.
No, you're fine. I just want to point out we're in the process of updating our catalog listing. So we'll have over 120 complete countries, completely updated schema. And I noticed it said our update frequency was quarterly. We actually update our data every few days. So we'll have some bigger updates coming to what's specifically on the spatial data catalog. But if you're not familiar, feel free to reach out to us directly for any clarity.
Fantastic. You said that's 125 countries?
125 complete countries, data across 200 countries and territories. And we can pretty much kind of tackle any country that you have a need for. So,
amazing. Even Greenland? Greenland's always the famously no data country.
Probably a few POIs there. So we could probably...
If anyone can find them, I'm sure it's you. Okay, back to the slides. Okay, so we have our stores, we have our merchants. What's the next step? Now we want to look at creating trade areas. So you can see we're using this generate trade areas tool. And what this just does is defines a trade area for each of our merchants. In this example, I've used a 800-meter buffer from each of the stores, which is approximately a 10-minute walk. But you can also do things like do actual walking or drive time catchments, so they actually reflect the conditions and shape of the transport network. You can use things like spatial indexes, which are grids to define your catchments. So there's lots of different ways of doing this. This is probably the simplest one, which is why it works really well for a webinar, but there's lots of different ways depending on your specific use case. So now we know the areas where people are really likely to shop at individual merchants. So next we need to know who those people are. And then with this, we're going to run this tool called Customer Segmentation Analysis Data, which is where we aggregate data from a bunch of different sources to each of our catchments to work out the sort of characteristics of those area, what the people are like who live there. So let's look at a map. Favorite part of any demo. Okay, so here we are in Carto Builder, which is our sort of visualization and analysis platform. Something I just want to show you before I run into looking through all our different data sets is how you can basically add in these types of analysis as SQL queries. So let's just take a look here at this top one. You can run really complex types of SQL analysis straight in app here. So you can do all your analysis in app rather than having to do it on your in R or in Python and then bring it in, or do it on your desktop GIS and then upload it. You can do it all in here, which makes things super easy. So let's get back to those input data sets. So these are the characteristics that we are gathering to help us understand what's happening around each of our stores. So first of all, let's take a look at population aged 18 to 24. Let's just turn off our merchants so we can see it a bit better. This is a really, I can't pronounce the name of this data set, and I don't want to for risk of offending anyone, but this is basically city block areas. It's really, really detailed. So we can see that the darker areas here are where there are more of the population who are aged 18 to 24, and that's really, really helpful for that brand that we said we have, where we're trying to target those young professionals, young students. We want to really be interested in those areas. And this is taken from the Mexico census, which I believe is available for free via the Carto spatial data catalog. Next, we're just going to look at the broad adult population, the size of the adult population and population density. So here you can see we are looking at the population age 16. Sorry, I'm just going to zoom in a little so you can see that a bit better. Aged 15 to 64. So again, these sort of dark purple and pink areas are where that population is a lot higher. The yellowy, orangey areas are where that population is that bit lower. So sort of makes sense, it's quite obvious. We would love our store to be around an area of a higher population because those are going to be areas where we potentially have more customers. Next, let's take a look at spend. So the next variable we're looking at here is the total spend in each of these sort of, you can see there's sort of, I can never remember the shape, parallelograms, rhombus. It's been a long time since I went to school. But the darker purple areas are areas where people are spending more of their money on food and non-alcoholic drinks. So that's great for us as a fizzy drink vendor. If we have people are spending loads of money on food and drink, we are a food and drink company. So these darker purple areas are probably going to be more appealing to us. The lighter pink and white areas where the spend's lower, probably not going to do so well over there. And then the penultimate data set, so we've got 5 variables that we're looking at here, is disposable income, which is kind of related again. So disposable income, obviously, is the money that you have left after from your salary, and all your essential spend has gone out of your bank account, all your sort of maybe food and drink, transport, rent, all of that. This is what you've got left. So we can see these dark pink areas over here are areas where people have a lot of money left at the end of the month, may be able to make more luxury spends, which ties quite nicely into our luxury brand. And then these lighter areas are where there's a bit less left in your bank account at the end of the month.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize too, there's a lot of different indicators you look at. You're looking at disposable income. We could look at what their true income is instead of just disposable. There's a lot of ways to slice and dice this. And I think really what it comes down to is knowing your customer base, knowing what will actually illustrate who they are. And I'm sure, you guys are the expert at that, but just want to help folks keep in mind, there's a lot of different ways to do this.
That's such a good point. Thank you, Dylan. There's more data sets on Earth probably than people. And wow, that's a really big claim. Please no one quote me on that. But you're completely right. There's so many different factors that go into these things, and you could go on and on and on, and sometimes you can get to a point of diminishing returns. So yeah, Dylan, you're exactly right. You know what is driving success in your company the most. This kind of stuff just helps you work out where that is. So you're exactly right. So the fifth and final indicator that we're going to look at here is footfall. So one of the problems with a lot of data in the world is that it is based on where people live. So it's based on resident data. So when we look at things like disposable income or we look at population, that's all based on where people live. But actually, we know that that's quite a small part of the picture. People travel a lot. They travel for work, they travel to see their friends, they go on holiday, they travel for all sorts of reasons. So one of the things that's really important to factor into things like this is also footfall and visitor numbers in an area. Take, for example, City of London, where I live. The City of London is a really small area in central London that is barely anyone lives there. It's really, really quiet, but the footfall is huge. So if you were to just look at residential data, you would have such a small part of the picture. So that's why it's really important to look at sort of daytime human activity and mobility as well. So in these instances, we'd probably be really interested in stores where footfall is high, because those are people who are likely to come into our stores and buy our fizzy drink. So that's a whistle-stop tour of our 5 variables that we're looking at to help us define our different clusters of stores. So let me hop back into the slides. So this is what we've done then. We've taken all of those 5 variables you can see here. So 18 to 24-year-olds, 15 to 64-year-olds, spend on food and drink, disposable income, and footfall. And this is what we have. So this table on the left, you can see we have a row for each of our store catchment areas with a store ID. And then we have a column for each of our input variables. The columns have not very helpful names because that's just what they have to be referred to as in the database. But these are basically the inputs that we were looking at here. So we've now got all of that information. And for people who are interested in the data science side of things, I won't go into this too much. We've also got a table of variable correlations between all of the inputs and descriptive statistics as well. And then the final stage of this analysis.
That previous slide.
Yeah, please.
What's really exciting about how this data internationally is developing, we're creating buffers around the POI and leveraging data surrounding that. What we're working on specifically is the ability to create geometry around all of the independent channels that you can leverage specific mobility insights to. So on a store-by-store basis, you'll be able to see specific store counts, what other places they went to, what other brands they're associating their kind of day-to-day footfall traffic with. And that's going to be really powerful and something that hasn't been done. I think this is a great starting point. Just want to emphasize how this data is evolving over time.
No, that's such a great point. Thank you. It's definitely, you know, there's probably a point a few years ago where none of this would have been possible. I can't wait to see where we are in a few years from here. It's going to be really exciting. So the final sort of step here is we have our 500 stores and we have all of this input information about them. And final step here is to run segmentation analysis on these. So to cluster these into groups based on these characteristics. So this tool here is the Run Customer Segmentation Analysis tool. This is probably the most data science-y section of this, but hopefully I can explain it quite clearly so you won't be too put off. What we're basically doing is taking all of those input characteristics and clustering them into a different number of clusters based on those characteristics to work out which groups fit together most well. So what we've done here is we've run this clustering analysis 4 times for 4 different segments. So, sorry, 4 segments, 5 segments, 6 segments, and 7 segments to work out how naturally those different merchants can fall into different groups. And that's what this table shows us. So on the left-hand column here, we have our different number of clusters, so 4, 5, 6, and 7 clusters. And then we have a Davies-Baldwin index, which we basically want this number to be really low. The lower this is, the more tight those clusters are, the less scattered they are, the more similar things are within our group, the more similar stores are. And then we also have a mean squared distance number as well. And again, we want this to be really low. So we want those clusters to be far apart. So we're saying here that the number, having 7 clusters, which are where these two numbers are the lowest, is the sort of optimum clustering, because all the Davis-Baldwin index shows us that all the characteristics are really similar within those stores. And then the mean squared distance shows us that they're similar, but they're also different to other clusters. I hope I've explained that at all well, but we'll share our contact details if you have any questions about this, and links to all the documentation as well. So, oh, I'm cheating. I've gone ahead and showed you the answer. So I just want to show you what this then looks like in a map. So we've decided we want to group our stores into 7 clusters, and then that's what this looks like. So these are our original merchants, and I've coloured them just by the clusters that they fall into. So you can see we've got, for example, cluster 1, which is light blue. A lot of those are in the city centre, but in these sort of inner city areas as well. Cluster 2 is this sort of light red colour, and a lot of these are found in the south of the city. So you can see there is some spatial element to this as well. You can see that sort of similar stores are slightly clustering together, but not entirely. So now we've got these clusters, we can start to think about which clusters and which store groups are optimum for each of our products. And what we've done is in Carto Builder, you can add these dynamic widgets on to the side to help you interrogate your data. So you can see for each of these of our input variables, we've added a widget which lets us look at our 5 top clusters for each of those. So we can see, for example, cluster 1 is where disposable income is the highest. We can see that for food and drink spend, cluster 3 is the highest. And for footfall, again, cluster 1 is. I won't go through all of these, but you get the idea. We can start to interrogate our data visually. And then let's just run back and look at the results of this analysis. So these are the average values of each of the input variables for each of our clusters. So this just looks like a lot of numbers right now, but basically darker green is better for our luxury brand, and whiter colors are poor for our luxury brand. So we can tell from this input information that clusters 1, 3, and 5 are going to be best for our luxury brand. They're where footfall is highest, they're where disposable income is highest, food and drink spend is high. Actually, on cluster 5, we can see that our disposable income is actually pretty low, but the food and drink spend is really high. So that could just actually be that people are really spending a lot on food and drink, which is what we want. So those are our 3 clusters, that we think would be best for our luxury brand. So to sum up all of that analysis, our luxury brand, which we are targeting at young adults, professional students, it's a higher cost, we think would really suit clusters 1, 3, and 5. Our economy brand, which is a lower cost and broad appeal, let's just have a look at the data again. We think would really suit clusters 6 and 7, which are sort of middling for all of these other variables. They're still, you know, food and drink spend is quite high, disposable income is quite high. They're all sort of in the middle and high enough, we think, to be able to support a good investment. And then finally, clusters 2 and 4, we actually think maybe wouldn't be worth targeting at all. Let's just return back to them, be easier to see here. So 2 and 4, you can see we've got a lot of cells in the white. So you can see footfall is really low compared to others, particularly 1. It's nearly a tenth the size of it. Age 18 to 24, really low. The population in total is really low. Disposable income is low, and food and drink spend is really low. So stores in cluster 2. In fact, let's just return to the map and take a look at that.
And just while you're pulling that up, I just want to point out, we're doing this on a very, I would say, geographically limited scope for a demo.
Yeah.
Think about the scale of this across all of Mexico, or think about the scale of this across all of LATAM. That's where you're really able to drive big impact to your company. And that's something you can do today with all the information and the approach that Helen's presented now. So really exciting and really, really cool to use this information to make decisions on how you act on that. all the way from a corporate office in New York down to LATAM or Southeast Asia.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with you. I think absolutely we're looking at a really small area with quite a small sample size of 500 merchants, sorry. And I should say I'm not showing it here because I'm doing a live demo and they can always go wrong with Wi-Fi. But analysis was really, really fast to run. So Carto is a cloud native platform, which means all of your analysis that you do, all of these functions that I've been showing you, happen exactly inside your cloud data warehouse, whether that is Google BigQuery or Snowflake, Databricks, Redshift, whatever it is you're using, all the analysis takes place in there, which makes things so quick and really, really scalable. So this took a couple of minutes for me to analyze tops for 500 stores. It really wouldn't take much longer than that for 5,000, 50,000.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's completely right. Really, really scalable.
And that's another important point, because I think obviously a lot of smart folks on the call that know how to work SQL, there's going to be a lot of folks that you want to support globally through potentially a global platform that they can access and look at information to support their own local insights. And I think without all of the SQL and all the groundwork that you did, and I'm sure you made it look easy, but just looking at this interface, it's very easy for any end user to come in and visualize and understand. So when we see what a lot of the broader kind of initiatives CPG companies are doing, it's to build that global platform, not just for data scientists to use, but for everybody across their enterprise to use. And that's what you want to think about doing from a scalability perspective.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And that's one of the reasons why we've just recently launched this new tool called Carto Workflows, which is, I flashed it up a minute ago. It's a sort of very, very intuitive visual way of running all this sort of analysis. So lots of people, and I'm definitely one of them, love to use SQL and love to code things, but not everyone does. And that's why we've developed something that's more visual. It's kind of like a flow diagram, so it's really easy and intuitive to run this sort of really complex analysis, but without having to code. So yeah, so I think that pretty much brings us to the end of our, one more thing I had to mention. I knew I missed something out, which sort of actually speaks to what we were just speaking about, which was, we've shown all of this as sort of self-service analysis. You're running the code yourself, you're running the workflows yourself, you're doing all of this yourself. But we actually at Carto offer, because CPG is so location is so integral to CPG, we've developed a specific app, a unified workspace, all for CPG analytics, which roll all of the things that you need to do your location intelligence with regards to CPG all in one place. So you've got all of your data in one place, you've got all of the analytical tools built in here. So if it's something that you're interested in, like a really discrete bundle, then that's something that we can offer them. Feel free to drop me a message, we can talk about it. And I think that brings us to the end. Dylan, would you like to share your concluding thoughts?
Absolutely. So thank you, first of all, for driving between slides and a demo. I know how challenging that can be. Great job. So yeah, some concluding thoughts. I mean, I think obviously, as we talked about in the first part of the presentation, global growth has a number of challenges because we're dealing with a very different market, and we need to use foundational data to drive a high degree of success. And so obviously there's a lot of different ways to approach this. We want to keep in mind that with this foundational data, merchant data, POI data, demographic data, solutions can be scaled locally in our first example of identifying the highest priority merchants globally. So we want to be able to look from a global perspective at our trade areas, figure out where the gaps are, and drive our solutions towards that. We can start simple and evolve over time, although when you work with a partner like Carto, they may be able to help you evolve much faster. But I think what we've seen in the CPG space is a lot of companies want to be able to take different approaches to how they handle this. And so you can start simple, always leverage a platform like Carto to visualize it, but evolve and enrich those data sets and those analyses over time. I think the final parting thought I have, and open to debate, is that really only a handful of large CPGs are taking a spatial approach to growth, which means there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity to stay ahead of the competition, which again, we know is fierce across these international markets when we're dealing with 2 shelves instead of 40. So there's a big opportunity to leverage this data, capture the market share, and help your entire company grow in these high potential but highly challenging markets.
Yeah, I think that's a really great summary of what we've been talking about. I think on that last point in particular, one of the things that like my whole job is basically doing is persuading people that where matters and talking about why where matters. And I think, you know, growth is such a key thing. A lot of the data that we've been showing you, a lot of the tools we've been showing you are really, really spatial. And if you ignore that spatial element of what's going on with your business, then you're missing out on some huge insights, which are fantastic for driving growth, but also for loads of other things across your business. So for de-risking growth or de-risking current operations, one of the big areas that we help people with is geomarketing. So we've been talking about, this has been kind of a distribution use case, I suppose, but also marketing could completely fall into this. So where you're going to be targeting certain marketing campaigns. Also in terms of just general outreach, something that I always find whenever I'm at an event or something like this, people always come up to me and they say, God, I just love maps. I just love maps so much. There's something so engaging and easy to understand about spatial analysis or just a map in a way that if you showed someone a bar chart or if you showed someone, you know, a p-value or some statistics, they're just gonna look at you blankly. But something like this can really engage people, really get people thinking, and that's where I think there's huge value there.
Absolutely. The future of geospatial is very bright, so.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Okay, fantastic. Let's pause there and I'll just pop over to the Q&A and see if we've got any questions. Let's take a look. Oh, there's quite a lot in the chat. Access to the recording, amazing, all of the tools. Thank you, Gustavo. I have a question. What is the accuracy of CPG data real time? For example, there could be a store on data set that is already closed or has moved to another venue. Do you have a confidence ratio for this? Dylan, this seems like it's talking a lot to your slide that you had about turnover.
Yeah, definitely. And so, Gustavo, you're thinking about it the right way. So I appreciate this question. You know, a couple things that we do to handle this issue, and you're right, the turnover is a challenge, right? Places close. And from a data perspective, it's really difficult to handle that. First, we are able to pick up on changes in the status of the stores, open, closed, temporarily closed. Maybe it's a new branded location that's coming soon. We can pick up on those with our system every few days. And when we capture information about a place, we have 2 proprietary, what we call metadata indicators. So first, we're giving you a confidence ratio, as you stated, really a confidence score from 0 to 100 that changes dynamically every few days on the quality of the place and quality of the record. What we also capture is how confident we are a place is open or closed. And we give you that information so that you can make decisions on how to leverage the data. So very, very common challenge, something that out of the box we can help you tackle.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm sure, Gustavo, if you've got any more questions on that, Dylan will be more than happy to answer. I'll flash up our contact details in a second. So you've got another question. I think this is more for me, but Dylan, feel free to jump in if you have any thoughts, which is that we mentioned there being different types of trade areas for analyzing stores. What are the different types and why would you choose one over another? Which is a really, really great question. It's kind of goes back to what Dylan was talking about how you know your business best and you know your needs best. So only you can evaluate which is the best for you. But there are basically 3 types. So we have the fixed distance buffer, which is the one I showed you in my demo, which is where you measure a fixed distance from your store. You have something called an isoline, which is a catchment based on the actual transport network. So the walking network, the road network, if you're looking at something like a road network, often that will include things like one-way streets or road speeds or restrictions and things like that. And then finally, you have something called a spatial ring, which is where you take a grid, like a spatial index, if you're familiar, things like H3 and quad bin, and you define the number of steps in that grid away from your merchant. And that is how you define the catchment. So that's probably less commonly used, but it's probably the fastest to compute. But the other two are used much more commonly, the fixed distance and the sort of isoline. So the advantage of a fixed distance is that it runs really, really quickly. It's completely, I say free to run, but if you use something like Google BigQuery, it will take up kilobytes like you're probably familiar, but it's really quick to run, it's really quick to store, and it's really good for those purposes, but also for sort of illustrative catchments. So for example, if the transport network in a certain area, is going to change. For example, I ran some catchments recently for some new stations, and because the transport network was going to change so much, there was no point in using the exact transport network to do that analysis. So it's really good for that. Walking sort of isolines, so those ones that are modeled on the exact transport network, they often take a bit longer to compute. They can sometimes incur credits from service providers. So at Carto, we use Hero Mapbox, and you have a certain number of credits per month to be able to use to do that, including your subscription. So they can incur extra fees, but they are really, really accurate. So if you want to be sort of making really accurate decisions, they can be much more useful. I hope that helps. More questions. Thanks for your presentation. Is this tool in the cloud? So Carto, yes, is fully cloud native. So what that means is you can basically connect directly to your cloud data warehouse. So that could be something like BigQuery or Snowflake or whatever that is. You can connect directly to those and load your data in from those into Carto, or view it from Carto, sorry. But it's always, all the data always stays in your data warehouse. All of the analysis that you do, so the SQL functions I was showing you, that all happens in your cloud data warehouse. So it's fully cloud native. We do offer things like on-prem support. We do offer connections to Postgres databases. And you can also, if you use things like CSV files or shape files or those more sort of static files, you can upload those into Carto as well. I hope that helps. And then I think, have we got any more questions?
I think there's just one other question, and I think this is the broader question about how Carto's tool, obviously cloud-based, you can connect it to a lot of different databases and marketplaces. I think that's awesome. What does a typical rollout look like of the Carto platform, especially for a CPG company that would maybe want to support a global workforce? I think that'd be a really good thing to go over for some of the folks on the call.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dylan. I'll try and answer this to the best of my ability. So I wouldn't say there's really a typical rollout for Carto. Most of our customers are sort of data analysts, data scientists. So typically it sort of stems from there, but we do also have a lot of people who are business users who maybe don't have GIS skills and things like that and are interested in more sort of point and click analysis. The way it rolls out globally, we do have a lot of customers who are using this on a global basis. But yeah, I would say there's not sort of one rollout that looks exactly the same for every company. We sort of work with individual organizations to see what their needs are and how we can best help with that. So if you are interested, do feel free to drop me a line. In fact, I'm going to share my screen now so you can see our contact details. Let me just flash up here. So yes, I think that brings us to 4:50, which is when I'm supposed to close. I don't think I've ever finished a webinar on time, so I'm sure our moderator will be really pleased with me. So thank you so much for coming and for all your great questions. If you have any more or have any comments or just want to reach out and have a chat, you can find me at hmckenzie@carto.com, or if you're on social media, you can find me at Helen Makes Maps, and I've got Dylan at Dataplor.com as well. So thank you again all for coming. Thank you so much, Dylan, for being a fantastic co-host, and have a great afternoon, evening, morning, potentially, and speak to you soon.
Well, thank you all. Take care.